Gene and I really enjoyed seeing your studio where you do your art.
Oh, good.
That was, yeah, I didn't realize there were so many artists in that building.
Well, we're not an artist ghetto like the Northrop City. We have other, we got a coffee roaster and a catering company. There's 4 writers in our building, 2 poets.
I guess they're.
Yeah, so they have little rooms. So it's kind of a mixed up, building.
You mean they rent space for?
Yeah, they rent space, a room of their own. Yeah, and then there's photographer.
It's
Photographer.
Yeah, the first thing.
People that make tiny little lights for.
Yeah. You'll see her with.
Magnifying.
girl
Through a
here,
microscope.
not coming, I guess, huh?
Odd little companies in there too.
Gene Olson, Gene's not coming, right?
Jean is not coming today.
I assume
She was planning on it.
That's what I thought. I thought there were over a dozen, so I looked, and then there were about 5 people I never heard yes or no on, so
He
I.
saw me with a scarf around my neck and putting my underwear on and my long johns out. He decided not to come. Throw us.
Yes. Thank you for braving the cold. I mean, you remember the old days when you used to get this more often.
In July.
Yeah. July. Okay, well, okay, we've got part 4.
Carol, can we names again?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, Catherine is the one especially, well, and Larry too, I think Kirsten's getting more names down, but, Larry and.
But
Yeah.
Kirsten's memory is not reliable.
Yeah, I know how that is. I'm terrible at names too. So I'm Carol. And I guess I'm the official host and for the most part. So anyway, and we can go around the room.
And I'm Steve.
Fred.
Brett,
Fred.
Larry,
Paul.
Kirsten, Catherine.
Kathy.
Oh, I can't remember that.
Gary.
Jim.
Bob.
What, I missed you.
Mike.
Michael, okay, thank you.
Okay, so and if you need to ask again, or actually maybe when we speak, we have something to say, maybe we could say our names again one time. If we think of it. We probably won't, but anyway, so we're on the part that has to do about church. Well, actually, it's entitled Wisdom. Christ in God, a process, eschatology, yeah.
I was wondering, just before we get into the book, Jim had an interesting reference to Whitehead and Princeton University. Could we get that?
Sure.
What's that now?
Do you have something to tell us about
Oh,
Whitehead?
I didn't refresh my memory, but maybe I can come up with a sentence or two. What?
Well, was all that material about what do we do to keep this culture of democracy going? And it's under considerable threat. So Whitehead was addressing that.
Yeah. Maybe I should bring that back next month, but yeah, you probably have noticed, as I have, that Whitehead's name does pop up here and there. It's like a lot of things. You think, well, I never heard of this guy, maybe until I met Sponheim 20 years ago. Or maybe I barely heard of him. But then once he gets in your consciousness, all of a sudden, and so this was the reference, as Paul mentioned, was to this whole battle going on in the last few years now related to academic freedom. And I had the opportunity to go to Princeton as an undergrad. And to the credit of our president, he really has stood up against the onslaught from the federal government and really pushed back. And so I think it was tied into that. But let me go back and then I'll promise to have a little more detail. But he And you might have something to add, Paul. I guess the question, what would Whitehead have to say about academic freedom? Do you have another thought or two about that, or how that fits in?
I think his record is pretty clear. I kind of worry that in some ways, this is, this is a guy that, I don't know why people are interested in him. He seems so weird. But, and then you begin to find, I was reading this book about the race to build the atom bomb. And what's the name of the character that was the film subject?
Oppenheimer.
Yeah, that's it. He was studying under Alfred. There's the name, Alfred North Whitehead. His primary teacher in philosophy at Harvard was Whitehead.
Oh.
So his name, like Jim says, just continues to Whitehead pop up Whitehead. So we are in a group of people, a large group that is Whitehead interest is international. In China, intermediate fourth grade students are studying Whitehead. It's part of the established curriculum. And John Cobb was given a position of recognition. Hungary, Eastern Europe, there are centers to study Whitehead. So it may be kind of weird and getting up in the chilly Midwest, but we're part of a community, and it's wonderful to see this bunch here today. It would be easy to stay home.
Wow, it's interesting. Oppenheimer and Whitehead. Okay, so good, a few more people. Tom and Rick. Trying to get names for people, so. Anyway. So, 4 chapters. Identity through faith, and the one on the Holy Apostolic Church. And the sacraments and universality. So should we take one chapter at a time, or just half of it hits together by the end anyway? But
I'd
what would you like to do?
go backwards.
Go backwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Start at-
Universality.
Yeah, because I think she builds up to that religious pluralism,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden, all these other faiths are God is working in all of them in similar ways to Christianity. And so God's, as I understand it, God's aims can be accomplished through Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever. But then prior to that, she seems to make or want to make a really strong case for, say, sacraments, why we need baptism and the Eucharist to, as Christians, that we have to have those, and we have this kind of set of beliefs, which is what we hold on to say that God works in these ways in Christianity. But then I didn't see that the essentialness of accepting what she asks us to in Christianity, that fit with her claims for religious pluralism, which I really liked. I agree with her on that. But I wasn't sure that everything she said about what Jesus did and what sacraments do was essential for our belief system for Christians. Yeah. So it just kind of combines them. So
Good question. I mean, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Why, why do we have so many different beliefs, and does that water us down to nothing? I mean, we try to water them all down so we're all the same, or do we accept our identities?
yeah, and she was pretty clear about
Yeah.
that. No, she's not. Doesn't mean that.
Uh-huh. Well, I'll speak to it. I know, baptism, for me, I've always felt, I had a baptism story, so. Which my mom made very clear, so, and I remember being born in the years when people were really worried about if you were not baptized, did that mean you were not saved? I remember hearing that even in college, that question's still being raised to discuss. I
I
think,
just heard it yesterday.
yeah. And yet I have grand nieces and nephews that I'm sure are not baptized and probably won't be. I don't know. But I mean, I was baptized in the delivery room by a Catholic nurse because I was 2 months early. And mom told me that when I was we talked a lot about it when I was about 4th grade. And in fact, she even had the name of the nurse and everything. And I was a shy kid, so I regret I didn't do this. We found the name of the nurse in the phone book. And do you want to call her up and thank her? I was too shy to do that. And I regret it to this day that I did not do that. I wish mom had forced the issue a little bit more. Because I mean, it was an interesting thought. She always kind of joked. She said, Roman Catholic nurse, she did it right, But I don't, to me, I think baptism is more, and I think many of us now would say that it's who we are, but surely God's love is bigger than baptism, and that if we're not baptized, that we're out. There isn't an in and out with God. We're all in.
Can I plug in here a little bit? I regard the sacrament of baptism and the sacrament of the altar for communion as gifts of God,
Yeah.
from God's love. I think Holy Communion is an ongoing gift of God's love, and whether they're essential or salvation, can I use that word, or redemption? I think maybe not. And I remember Barb Clothier and her husband Carl, when I was a parish pastor, had a baby who was it was stillborn. We were really looking forward to this child. It would have been their the third child. And they called me from Regent's Hospital and asked if I would come down. And I talked to a nurse on the phone. And I got there. Barb and Carl wanted their baby, who was stillborn, and she was holding him. And they wanted him baptized. And the nurse said to me in private, she said, I didn't know what to do because I don't know how Lutherans regard baptizing the dead. This is the way she put it to me. And so I said, well, we regard it as an act of God's love. And in this case, I think it's an act of God's love for the parents. Not for the child so much, but for the parents. So I did that. That's my take on sacraments. Shorthand.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But your question is, if I heard it properly, is that how do we square our particular beliefs in Christianity and maybe even in denominations of Christianity with other religions, be it Judaism or Islam or whatever. Is that what you were kind of?
And does Suhaki do that? Because I think she's trying to, but like she asks on page 171, how can there be any other way whereby God works for the well-being of humanity? It's right in the middle. And then she says that there are other religions where God does that. Then she says, and if there is, doesn't this detract from the incarnation, make it less important somehow, and faith less urgent? And I think she wants to say no, but I feel like, given what everything else she said, I would say yes. At least a little bit less urgent. And even when she talks about people who don't have any faith as we think of it.
Different edition, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, I'm just, excuse me if I interrupt. I realize there's more than one
It's
of
in the universality chapter, page
More than one
171 in this edition, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages in.
It doesn't square it with mine. This must be an earlier edition.
So when she talks about the people who don't have a proclaimed faith, who are secular, is that, what about them? And, well, yes, they do, because
Interesting.
God can work them and in them.
Most of the great process thinkers turn to ethics. They started in cosmology, metaphysics, but they end their lives working on ethics. And ethics links people together in a way religion often fails to do. Religion tends to emphasize differences, create boundaries. In his book, Religion in the Making, Whitehead talks about that danger of fencing off. You've got God here now. It's called the absolute. The danger of the absolute. The absolute separates people, doesn't connect people, ethics. So when Cobb spends the last 10, 15 years of his life working on such things as a new economic measure that would change the Dow Jones and the essential thrust for connectedness is going to put limits on how much you do this boundary setting. I suppose it's natural that when you have something that you value, and you notice somebody else doesn't have that, there gets to be a tension there. But certainly the emphasis of the primary Cobb people, John Cobb's students, would be on connectedness, and Suhaki would fit that. Her book on diversity.
Divinity and diversity.
Yeah.
But she develops this stuff that's in the universality section or chapter in that book a little bit more, although it's written. This still has the flavor of an academic teacher. Divinity and diversity is more aimed at people who don't necessarily have theological or philosophical background. So it's a little easier to read.
Is that the title of the book? Divinity and Diversity?
I think that the movement or direction toward a common ethic is illustrated by Habitat for Humanity, which talks about the fact that people from very diverse theological backgrounds can pound a nail, and that is a type of unity that can be experienced in that working together toward the good. Even though there may be differences in a theological background.
I think one of the things in the sacraments chapter that I see, and I don't know if this helps at all, frankly, but that I see is, she has a Methodist, Anglican kind of a take on the sacraments, which is a little different. That we don't, we've got common communion with them, but it's a little different than what we are taught as Lutherans. But what I see here is her emphasizing with baptism the ongoing life connection with Jesus. What would Jesus do kind of what she says, we're bound by a word and freed or liberated in baptism, and that what she is saying is we have a set of relationships that really bind us to the life of Jesus, not to our eternal salvation, not to not even to complete conformity to Jesus, but in fact that we're bound to the life of Jesus going all the way through Golgotha and the resurrection as Christians. She doesn't develop, because this is a Christian theological systematic theology, right? She doesn't develop that in relationship to other religions. She simply says that God also creates those kinds of relationships according to the insights, the realities of the other religions, right? So it isn't so much that being bound to Christ in baptism is superior, right? Or even exactly the same. But our category is incarnation, and we are bound to Christ's incarnation in a way that we participate in it, right? We're Christ incarnate. Luther would have said, we're little Christs to our neighbors, and our neighbors are Christ to us. That's where I think Luther steps a little bit beyond where she goes when he says our neighbors are Christ to us. But the being baptized is being baptized for the life of walking the path of reflecting God's love, even to the point of death on the cross. And with communion, she brings the community into it. So it's sort of like baptism is the one, and the community is the many. The many become one and are increased by one, and you have this rhythm between the two, between the baptism and the community. I am not sure if I think what she is doing, frankly, she did a lot of work with Buddhism. I think what she is doing is wanting to say, yeah, all these religions are equally realms of God's work. The language may be different. What a Buddhist says, when a Buddhist says the word God, it doesn't mean the same thing as when we say the word God, right? But that doesn't mean that the God that we happen to know through Jesus Christ isn't active in the practices of Buddhism, isn't active in the commitments that the communities make. It's just active in a different way. Or the God that the Buddhists talk about isn't active in our faith. Right, yeah. It goes both ways.
There is a metaphysical aspect here. You know, in process thought, there are three basic realities. There's God, there's creativity. Those are two, not one. God and creativity. And then there are all the finite coming togethers that we have. Now, we've got 15 coming togethers, and each one of us has 2,000. You know, so in the 19 I think it was 1927 Journal of the American Academy of Religion, not a prominent place to publish. John Cobb wrote an article on two ultimates, God and creativity. And he argues in this chapter, in this essay, that Buddhism elevates creativity and Christianity elevates God. There's a religious absolute or there's a philosophical absolute creativity. Now that chapter that he wrote for that journal has been pretty much ignored, but there's a big issue there. And Buddhism is usually linked with creativity, not God.
Well, that for John, I
Yeah.
think Marjorie is saying something a little bit different.
What do you think she's saying?
I think she's saying God is at work in Buddhism too, just not as a, in effect, it's a different, God is what we call the superjective nature of God, that which is sending out the aims for the world, is sending different aims. Not a different overall value, but different particular aims to Buddhism and so on. And if we were doing John's thing, John never did this as far as I know, but I think if we wanted to talk about the three ultimates that she talks about here, God, world, and creativity, to some extent, world could be represented by the indigenous religions, right? That see the spirits very vividly expressed in the environment, in the world.
You know, the Dalai Lama was here a number of years ago. I'm looking at Kirsten because he was here at part for the Nobel Peace Prize for him at Augsburg that year. And I heard him speak, I think, 3 times in about 3 days. And people said, what did the Dalai Lama have to say? And I said, well, compassion. He just kept repeating compassion, which suggests something more shared, right?
And that's where what Paul was talking about the ethics, finding common ground in the ethic. Compassion is, in some ways, the World Council of Religions claim that all religions are aimed towards compassion for others.
I've got a couple of Thich Nhat Hanh's books, and he has one on Buddha in Christ, and comparing them. Not they're the same, but he was saying we can learn a lot from Buddhism, and he made a comparison to say, if we understood Buddhism and centeredness, in finding the compassion in us, that is really teaching us what the Holy Spirit is about, if we put it in Christian terms. And I really liked that. It was interesting.
I didn't know there were so many variations of Buddhism
Yeah.
until I was reading Suhaki here,
Yeah.
and she just mentions it basically.
Mhm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there are theistic and non-theistic and sort of spirit-based versions of Buddhism.
I've always thought of Buddhism as more of a way of living than the emphasis on God. That's
Yeah.
mistakenly, obviously, but that's the way I thought.
That's why a lot of people do today blend Buddhism with Judaism or with Christianity. I haven't heard so much about Islam, but many of the practices of the Sufis are pretty close to the practices of
More contemplative, would you say? Is that fair?
yeah.
No.
There is a connection in the Corinthian letters, and you have the emphasis of the Christ hymn. Though he was in the very form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be clung to, but he emptied himself. And John Cobb and Masao Abe together issued a paper on that verse. He emptied himself. That's a big theme in Buddhism, the emptying of himself. So it's not just the God stuff, but it's the ethics. Do you empty yourself into the world and into a new economic measure? And Cobb's last 15 years, it was all about China. How can we understand the Chinese and Buddhism with the Chinese as partners, not rivals, not competitors, but it would be a group about this large, and Cobb would be there, the shortest man in the room. There are some tall Chinese too, but he was pressing, and he was a Bernie Sanders supporter. They're reaching out into the socialist structures, caring for the world.
I remember when he was speaking in this very room to the process group and Cobb, and he did mention the challenge of Christians working with the Buddhist religion. I don't remember what he said about it, but he said it's a challenge to interact with, to relate with them in meaningful ways about faith, religion.
Question, and I'm new to this part yet, so excuse me if I'm missing something. But this is all talk about cognitive approach. What about experientially? What do these different traditions say about, what does Suchaki say about the contemplative, unconscious experience of connection with the divine, vis-a-vis Buddhism or whatever?
Well, honestly, I would say that most of the process metaphysics says that our experience takes place pre-consciously.
Pre-conscious.
Pre-consciously.
Yeah.
So thinking is kind of the final stage of any moment of coming into existence, any moment of experience. And so all the reflection that we do follows the experience rather than initiating it. That said, it doesn't, what we do with that reflection can affect the next moment of experience.
Does our thinking, does our cognition necessarily validate that unconscious experience, or can it diverge from it?
It evaluates it,
Okay.
and it can judge it in various ways. And if it, God is involved there, and if it judges it in a different way than God is judging it, it steers us towards sin, if you will. Does that make sense?
That steers us toward.
Our experience of evaluation will steer us towards sin, steer us away from God's evaluation.
One more follow-up, would that apply also to someone who was Buddhist?
I missed that. Someone what?
Would that apply to a Buddhist as well as a
Oh.
Christian?
Yeah, the metaphysic, God sends an aim, we process that aim, we reflect on it, we then aim at a new, we have what's called a subjective aim that aims at a new moment. God is always steering us toward God's values, but we have a variety of pre-conscious urges, if you want to call them that may steer us astray, right?
Couldn't they not steer us?
Yeah, and they can, and that's the point of what she's saying about Jesus and his fidelity to revealing the character of God, right? But yeah, I mean, all of that could apply to Buddhism. Just Buddhism would leave out Jesus, the cross, the resurrection, and a number of other things.
We value.
Could that presuppose that in the aim of God, that Christ and the values that, we've inherited from, the Jewish documentation all the way through, and the methodologies to support that God was working through that, but there's a whole lot left of the world
Mhm.
that just didn't have the documentation, that we had inherited.
That has
That
different.
God
traditions,
works,
yeah.
that God continues to work. God worked during that also, which begs the question of the higher values.
I'm not clear how it begs the question of how higher value.
In other words, the question, or the thing isn't how do we interpret love, which we interpret through Christ and those. Is that the proper interpretation from God's aim? Or does he segment parts of the aim to different populations in order that there's another value of collectiveness and cohesion that he wants to see happen?
So I think Suhaki would go with your second, that there's a diversity, divinity and diversity is the
Right.
title of her next book. There's a diversity of ways in which each religion chooses its tradition. I mean, it doesn't feel often like we're choosing our tradition, but every time we decide to do this part of, the liturgy and not that part, or change we are changing the tradition just by living it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But each religion has a partial view
Right.
of where God is aiming, and they all have validity, and they all can interact with each other and learn from each other. But we're never going to get that complete picture from any one religious.
The formulation that he gives us, Whitehead gives us in Religion in the Making. He says Buddhism is a metaphysics trying to be a religion, and Christianity is a religion reaching for metaphysics. So let's get the two together.
Yeah.
And for the next 30 years, he was working at that.
Yeah. And John Cobb too. John, you've mentioned John and Masawa Abe looking for an integration, right? So part of what is possible given this view is not
so much domination of one religion that he has to get rid of all the other religions in order to, you know, pass the truth on, but dialogue that leads to integration of understandings and maybe even integration of practices and communities.
Think about your freshman religion class at the Christian colleges. You know, and parents at home, grandparents probably more so than parents, but are saying, what happened to my child's faith? They went to college. How do we deal with relativity? Christianity has relativity within itself. Jesus was a Jew. I mean, he was not an Islamic believer. You know, we have to find a way. A good liberal arts education is going to involve relativity. We're reaching for metaphysics.
Well, and one of the more interesting chapters in the book is the chapter on the Trinity, and she really goes at that in that chapter. I'm not going to say more about that right now, but she wants to change the name of the Trinitarian name for one thing. But she talks about the way that our words are culturally relative and that different contexts require reassessment of them.
I feel like this isn't too far away from what our discussion is now, but there are 3 lines in this book in the universality chapter on 174 in my copy, after she quotes Ephesians, but the very stress on creativity that is found not only in process forms of theology, but also in the whole mystical tradition of the church, gives witness to the impulse toward creativity that the route of the one can yield. Also, secularism is itself uniquely a child of Christian sensitivities. Could it be that our love for the world, inspired through our love for God, has generated the child of secularism? And is that in line with going to college and feeling like you're getting away from Christianity?
Yeah, I think there's a huge whole historical account, and honestly, one of the better but more difficult to read accounts is called The Secular Age by Charles Taylor. That basically demonstrates the channel, right? How did Christianity lead to secularism? I don't think going to college necessarily leads to secularism. Right. The evidence suggests, though, that the more education people have, the more questions they ask about the frame that they are given. And that's it's a good thing, right?
Don't we learn critical thinking in college?
Yeah. We hope.
I remember my first religion class in Moorhead. They talked about, okay, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal. That is wrong to steal. Well, the young father went to the bakery and stole a loaf of bread because his family was starving. Was that wrong? So we had to think about, that was a revolution. Well, maybe that wasn't wrong. Well, that's now what?
I think education, good education, thinking raises questions. Thinking raises questions.
But then there's that Mark Twain quote, I went to school, you go to school to unlearn everything. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's not very good. But
Well, and I think that's true to some degree, because when the grandparents questioned their grandchild's education, severing them from religion. It severs them from a religion that you can totally understand. God is God and we aren't God. And we're sitting around here trying to understand that relationship maybe, and it's beyond us, period.
And see, now I went to a Baptist school, so.
Yeah.
But my philosophy religion class, which was interesting, talked about the different religions, though narrow, like Paul said, try to narrow who God is, how he works, and what he expects of us, as opposed to expanding based in this professor's whole thing was we forget the createdness of God.
That's a,
You know, he is creative. He is creative in who he is actually always creative. He expects us to be creative, and he's imposing in the creativeness. Then one aspect of it is connectedness.
Yeah.
And his whole thing was rules separate us. Okay.
So point of fact, I think we lose our young people after confirmation, don't we?
Yeah,
Just to be accurate about it, it's long before they go to college.
right,
Let's not blame the colleges.
right, for sure.
I don't think that's true. I think that's true.
I wanted
I see you nodding, isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
well, and there's a voluntary aspect to whether or not you learn critical thinking at any stage of life, right? On the one hand, you do have to be exposed to it, but you can refuse it.
I wanted
And some, as a college teacher, I want to say some students do.
I wanted to just pick up the theme of God is always creating. That's such a rich theme. And the next thing we are reading after one more month on Suhaki is a book called The Poet of Creation. And that I happen to be the author. Anyway, I have read the book. That's a big theme. God is in John chapter 5, verse 23. Jesus is criticized for healing on the Sabbath. Go ahead with your healing, but not on the Sabbath, my goodness. He was caught healing people on the Sabbath. And then Jesus says, my Father is still working and I am working. So the Creator God is still working. You don't have to show it with your Jesus stamp, and I am working. He's accepting that measure of relativity right there. God is always creating.
And we
Even
think
in
of
judgment,
creation.
God is creating, opening the way for new
Mhm.
vista.
We limit creation sometimes to the physical world, right? He's creating new things. But he also is creating new thought. He's creating new ways for relationship, both with himself and I believe in the connectedness of his creation. You know, and you know, what I always figure out, does he do it out of necessity or is that part of the process? You know, but
Yes, yes.
I'm preparing a sermon for tomorrow, and I would like a little help. The reason I'm bringing it up is that in that text, it's Matthew 11:2. I don't know. Anybody else preaching tomorrow?
No.
We use narrative lectionary, so that, okay, depending upon the lectionary, it's all different. Anyway, in that text, it says very clearly that John the Baptist is really wondering whether Jesus is the Messiah. And he has, John the Baptist is in prison, and he wants to know he's going to be killed and all that. And it seems that the answer to that is Jesus telling him what he has done. He lists all the things, such as the dead raised, blind see, and so forth. And but then even his family question whether he is the Messiah.
So Jesus tries to teach critical thinking.
Pardon?
Jesus is teaching critical thinking in that.
Oh, that's true. You're so
I'm not
right.
sure that's a sermon.
But, you know, how many people do question whether Jesus is the Messiah, whether Jesus is one? And I think even more nowadays, it's getting more people questioning, who is this Jesus? Is he worth giving him any credit? And of course, we're celebrating Christmas and celebrating his birth in just a few days. And I think for most of us here, that is a joy. We're looking forward to it. That's what I have to say.
Well, I remember being surprised in one of our readings earlier. I think it was with the Salvation book last year, where John Cobbs comes out and says, well, Jesus was a failed Messiah. I never heard him referred to as that before, but looking at the Jewish perspective, he was a failed Messiah. He did not kick out the Romans. He did not establish the kingdom of God on earth in Jerusalem as capital of the world. So he was a failed Messiah. And Jesus probably had originally thought, well, maybe he could have done that. Who knows? But God, had a plan B or a bigger plan, which enlarged the Messiahship to include all of us. And it was just different, not a kingdom of a king on earth, but we are all God's children, and God is our father, not our king. So a whole different take on it, and has taken us a long time to realize that. But anyway,
Which may say that Judaism was a failed religion, not Christ being a failed Messiah.
well, I wouldn't call it a failed religion.
No, I
wouldn't.
I mean, it's alive and well.
Yeah, that's that. And maybe it was a good hope, if the kings had listened to the right prophets, not the wrong prophets, but the right prophet, whatever, who knows? It could have been different in, modern ways. It wasn't. Anyway.
When I really appreciated Suhaki talking about the relativism of religions, and also the danger of thinking your particular faith is absolute. And I remember when I was growing up, that's what I was taught. If you didn't believe a certain way in Christ Jesus, that God acted there in a certain way, if you didn't believe that before you died, you were in big trouble. That was the only way.
And that's what took our daughter out of the church.
Pardon me?
That's what took our daughter out of the church.
Yeah. But I mean, that to me was it produced a lot of guilt. Let's put it that way. And
What it was designed to produce.
yeah, it probably was. It probably was. Yeah. But then you start reading people like Suhaki and Cobb and listening to Paul, and you think, well, and Kristen, and you think, well, maybe God's creativity goes beyond the finite, beyond my death, beyond the death of anybody. And if that's the case, then God's grace goes on too. Does it not? I mean, that's the way I'm thinking that God's grace goes on as well. I remember hearing, I think you probably don't, I don't know if you know him, Robert Capon, the Episcopal priest, and used to be a president of a seminary, I guess, I don't know, years ago. I heard him speak one time. After he spoke, he was taken to task by one of our pastors. I was embarrassed because he was sitting near me for not emphasizing that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that's it. And Capon said, well, I believe that, but that doesn't have to stop with death. I mean, whatever, God's grace goes beyond death and is very, is boundless, is like Suhaki said, it's just boundless. I don't know if this make any sense, but
I suppose the question we face is, if you have an absolute, you have passion. You're gonna work for that absolute. You're gonna live and think and strive, and you get up in the morning, what can I do for the absolute? Or if the absolute is really absolute, maybe it doesn't need that much help, but once you begin to accept relativity and see relativity at work in your own religion, your own training, your own you're living a relative life. Can you still muster the passion? You are acknowledging limitation. You're acknowledging you are not divine. You don't have a whole grasp of the truth. So that's the question that I think. But it is true that these processes in John Cobb wrote a great book on metaphysics, a Christian natural theology in the 1950s. It was a wonderful book. It really was a conversion book. But he ends his life working on China and how can we get to be partners with China. So he left the metaphysics. He had done that work and he moved to the ethics. And maybe that's kind of my own life story too, because I'm much more concerned about these matters than I was 30 years ago. But David Griffin, the same way. Daniel Day Williams, Lee Snook's teacher at Union Seminary. Daniel Day Williams. The book is The Spirit and Forms of Love by Daniel Day Williams. And he and Cobb were colleagues. So it's a big challenge, but the headway that Cobb made in China, he would go to China every year, and he would lecture across China. They were prepared to listen. They adopted certain curricular proposals. There is encouragement.
Yeah, I wonder, Paul, your book on forms of faith, was that at all that early book?
Yes,
Was that at all influenced by process thought?
Well, I had certainly been introduced to process thought before writing it. So it's in the right time frame. Contemporary forms of Christian thought, and the way I set the chapter up is kind of God and the human and the divine. Too much humanity, too much autocracy, too much domination. There's no explicit reference to these questions in the book, but it did precede.
There may have been some pre-conscious process thought.
Yes.
I would argue that anybody who believes in an absolute doesn't believe that she is still creating God, still creating. Because until she's done creating, there is no absolute.
Thank you for the gender switch.
You bet. I'm tired of the male gender. It's screwed up the whole world. There may be an absolute, but we cannot approach it. We do not understand what she is up to.
At the same time, we have some access. I mean, that's why any of us are here this morning,
Yeah.
right?
I just enjoy frustration.
But I don't think churches, congregations would exist if we didn't have some access. Some access to the desires of God, the aims of God.
I wanted to give a nod to Prince of Peace in that frame, reading what Sue Hockey said about the church and what Kirsten just said about what church is doing, trying to respond to the aims of God, that I'm not a member, but knowing a little bit about your church, those of you who are members here, it just seems like you're right on you're right setting the bar and living up to it. And I just want to acknowledge that. I mean, that training that's happening next month, today that we would have met. It's amazing that your church is hosting that.
Well, we have a Hispanic congregation that meets here on Sundays.
Oh, okay.
Right after we do, so we're concerned about their safety.
Yeah.
Can I make a statement and have somebody respond from a process perspective? This is just a question in the form of a statement. God does not know what God is thinking until we think it.
You missed that sentence. God
does not know what God is thinking until we think it.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. God does not know.
What God is thinking,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know what process is saying is that there is a primordial nature to God. And Sue Hockey was one of the great defenders of the primordial nature. And God does reach a harmonious integration. The primordial nature celebrates that givenness, that decisiveness. So primordially, God has actually, Whitehead actually has a section where he envisions God considering all these possibilities, and God chooses love. If you don't want God to love you, good luck. God made a choice. That's over. That's settled. God is not revising God's love. God is trying to actualize God's love. We're bringing it into the actual world. That's why this is prominent in this book. Sue Hockey is talking about how God's aim has to accommodate what's going on in the world, how the world affects God. God takes the world. That's moving from the primordial into the consequential, the consequent nature, because God is receiving the world. So this would fit very nicely with our discussion of the sinlessness of Jesus. Wasn't that 2 months ago, or was it
Last
1 month
month.
ago we talked about that? But God is is going to be affected by Jesus. Jesus is part of the natural world. He truly human. There's no docetism, there's no denial of the humanity.
All that Paul says is right in some ways. I also want to say, though, that I think one of the challenges of doing process thought is that Whitehead is describing things in the middle. Whitehead isn't really talking about what we understand as the beginning of time or the end of time. He's describing how things work now. And as part of that, God's nature, primordial nature, is prior to any of God's other action or anything that happens to the world. But on the other hand, that primordial nature of God always has to be reconciled with the consequent nature, which is receiving all of the things we do, say, and think. And so if we're talking about reflection, the way we think, God does need that world in order to reflect on what's going on and make the next aim. So there is a sense in which it is true that God does not know what God is going to do until God has received those actions. But the values that guide what God is going to do are there in the primordial nature in a permanent way.
So where is God right now and with all that's going on
Where's God right now and all that's going
in
on?
this world? ISIS, what else?
I think God is in the guy who kidnapped the ICE agents. I don't know if you heard of that.
I was not. So they had him in the back seats. They drove off with him.
Yes. I'd love to meet that.
I think one of our books has the Earth Charter, the United Nations Earth Charter. And it's a useful sketch. I don't know where God is precisely, but it's documents like that. The United Nations struggled to formulate a charter for the earth.
A non-glib answer, of course, is that God is at work in everything and everyone.
So God is, as Michael was asking, with a statement. God does work with what we think and do.
Yeah, so we want to say there's this primordial nature that is primordial. It comes before anything else. But at the same time, God is never only the primordial nature. God is always processing what we think and do. So
God is saying to God's self, let's see now, what would love mean for the protest movement? How do you love the enemy? Jesus said, love your enemies. Well, how would that work?
I'd like to interview a few of those ICE guys would be the way I think it would work. I haven't had the guts to do it, but
don't do it.
but I might, I'd just like to sit down and just say, now, how did you get into this work and
$50,000
how is it fulfilling you and what would your mother think of that?
My godson is an ICE agent. It was his dream job. And he was at the top of his class in the whole training thing. They sent him to a Spanish speaking country. He's fluent Spanish speaker. He's working overtime, flying around the globe, being and then this was before 2019 even, where he was, just like a chaperone. for people going to different countries. Well, he is heartbroken by what's happening.
I think
He
a
is
lot-
heartbroken.
I think that there are a lot of.
He has a hard time talking about what he is doing, and I mean, but he's still like, doing what he was trained to do. Then all these people, it's really tragic what's happened to the system. But I'm with Paul. I feel like God doesn't know what we're thinking before we think it, and God is pushing love. And I haven't been reading it lately, but there's a group called Faith America. And they are really fighting for Christ and Christian behavior. And they talk about what's happened with white nationalism. And yeah. So I like what they're doing, Faith America. It's kind of fun and to see what actions they're taking as a group. Pretty, what do you call it? Grassroots.
There was a video put out on social media this week by 18, can't remember the exact number of pastors of the Minneapolis area synod. Did you all see it? I'll send it to Carol.
Oh, you send it to the group, you got everybody.
Oh, I do have everybody. I don't want to, it takes about 5 minutes. I don't want to do it now.
Well, we can choose.
How was it this
But you
week?
can see it. It's pastors of the Minneapolis area synod. Basically, most of the central conference of pastors in Minneapolis. And it's a response to the attacks, specifically the language of calling Somalis garbage. A pastoral response. And I think it is relevant to this question of where is God now, right? They basically say God is in these people.
Yeah.
Right.
Where was this, or how was it distributed, did you say? Oh,
I saw it on Facebook. It
Oh.
10 times came through. It's social media. I think it went out on Instagram and some other things too. I'm pretty sure that a number of pastors will be using it in some way in their congregations, but I don't know exactly what the plans are. It came
This
out
might
on
be a
like
little off
Wednesday
track, but I
afternoon.
was intrigued by her comment that unity is in the future, particularly a shared future, and maybe this gets in there a little bit, maybe not, but that's an intriguing thought, because we're going to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, which are not united, obviously. We've got some states redistricting and this and that, and the other. I mean, we're clearly not united. Or maybe we will be in the future. Is that not to get into that specific, but that's an intriguing thought. That don't look for unity behind you because it isn't there. It's out somewhere out there.
One thought, earlier, Paul, these weren't your exact words, but I think you said something to the effect that particularity breeds passion. And thinking historically that at a certain stage of Christian growth, we had Inquisition, Crusades, at about the same year from the founding of Islam, the jihad movement grew and became even stronger, and that particularity breeds passion. The challenge for me is how to generate passion for what we're talking about as God's aim for love and unity. Because we're not, and we've got some look at diversity and look at ultimate unity, and how do we generate passion for ourselves without becoming sick.
Without becoming what?
Sick.
Oh, sick.
Have a perversion of faith.
So I'm gonna say, and I can't necessarily attribute this exclusively or even primarily to process. I'm gonna say that there is no love that is not particular. Right? God sends an initial aim to me that is particular. It's focused on my context, you know, who I am at this moment in this place. And so I don't love you know the old Snoopy line, I love mankind, it's people I can't stand. I don't love mankind. You can't love humankind.
I think
You can make a point of attention to the place that you are and loving in the context you have. And I think that's why we have worship. We hear about Jesus every Sunday. We love Jesus in a particular way, and hopefully that means we also go out and see and think about Jesus in the rest of our lives and try to be as loving toward who Jesus loves, who God loves, as we are able.
I have sometimes formulated these questions with the language of love and fear. Love can motivate more passion than fear does. There's a religion of fear that is powerful. People are scared, so they'll do what you tell them to. But love is a stronger. God gets up early and stays up late. I wouldn't want to bet against God.
I like what she says here.
Go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just gonna say, I like what Suhati says on. I think this relates, I'm not sure. On page 177, about missionary activities. She relates it to love.
What page?
177 in my version here, anyway. Towards the bottom of the page.
It's towards
Uh,
the end of the universality chapter.
Yeah. She says missionary activity is hardly abandoned in a church that places the universality of salvation in the nature of God, but it is undertaken in humility and love. I really like that. Humility, because one knows that salvation comes from God in many ways, and we are simply sharing the way that has been manifested to us. Love, because while one might consider going into a work with rewards of great visibility, admired by all the world, only if one loves deeply will one go to do a small deed to see the well-being of the 10, and that has reference to Sodom. I just like that. I mean, because for me, when I was reading this section on universality, which I really like, I thought, well, how do we relate to other religions, people who have grown up with faiths that are different from mine or from anybody, and I can't come at it in an absolute way that my way is the total truth, but with humility and love to share. I mean, that's difficult enough.
I think what can be harder sometimes almost than relating to other like world religious faiths is relating to other Christians. And I think it might tie in with what you said, Steve, about not becoming sick, because if we're in the same camp as people who are strongly anti-choice or anti-gay, no, that's whatever, and they're claiming Christian. That's a lot harder for me than
Yeah.
Yeah.
She also has an interesting point, it could be a point at the very end of the chapter when she seems to indicate, if we don't get our unity act together, we're in big trouble because we're gonna die. I mean, the idea of focusing with, on climate change, let's see, where is it? She exactly says that. It's on the last page anyway. Love and justice bursting out of the boundaries of our outworn forms take on a deeper meaning, our deeper forms, although all through the leading of God in this the small earth where we are forced to know one another in love or die. Could we be experiencing a new direction from God toward human community through the affirmation of many who remain many and yet are as one? If that were the case, and if we responded, we might know something of the reign of God on earth. I mean, it's leading into the next chapter, but that love one another or die. I mean, it made me think of climate change. She doesn't mention climate change, but it seems to me that's what she's thinking. That we sit there and we don't care enough about God's natural creation, and we should be learning from our indigenous brothers and sisters around the world, because they have a better connection with it, and we need a diverse way of solving it too. There's not just one way of solving, so we need to come together. Which reminds me, Darsha, I don't think, oh, there's Darsha. She actually made it on today. Let's see. Darsha, do you want to say anything to us?
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, I just came in at around 11 because my lecture went on that long. Yeah, I appreciate the comments that were said. And then the indigenous, you're bringing up the indigenous because our heritage, if we are well nested, evolved nest, well nurtured, we are designed to get addicted to people and to be, welcoming and open and connected. And you can see this in the first contact indigenous peoples of the world. Oh, they're very welcoming of the European explorers, and at first anyway, till they learned what they were about. But that's our nature, is to be open and welcoming, not this, us against them thing. But we kind of stress everybody now, and from pregnancy on. So then you use your self-protection mechanisms because you don't feel safe. So anyway, I think the challenge now is to return to the nurturing that is our heritage, so that we don't have to rely on protectionism because we don't trust anybody.
Yeah, and Darsha is going to be here tomorrow for a forum, which will be recorded so you can see it at another time. So anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad you made it. I kept looking to see if you were on. Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes here. Just a couple of things. Next month we cannot meet here on the second Saturday because there is a special training going on for handling possible immigration issues. ICE raids or whatever. So the obvious thing is just to move it 1 week, which is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, but that hopefully doesn't affect too many of you not going out of town or something. So we will just meet here on the third Saturday instead, if that's okay. I'll put out an email so everybody knows that, and check your calendars. The other thing, I've been kind of looking off and on to see about
how prevalent copies are of the Pulse of Creation, which we are going to be reading in February. The book that Paul Sponheim wrote and mentioned. It's not easily found. I've been checking different book sources, especially the used book sources. Weaver's had 7 or 8 or 10 or something that were actually reasonably priced. So by the time you put on shipping, it's about $10, which is not too bad, for $15. But a lot of them, you know, they'll have like 1 copy. I looked at Fortress Press, it said 1 copy available for $23 or something. So you might want to start looking for that because they do, you know, crop up or pop up once in a while. Pop up once in a while on used book.
It's on Kindle.
Books.
What's the
And
title?
Kindle, and it's on Kindle, but for what, 20 something dollars, and it's more expensive, isn't it? The Pulse of Creation, yeah.
And the title again is
Pulse of Creation.
Pulse.
Pulse, like your pulse.
So Paul's still getting
Oh.
big royalties of it.
We hope so.
Yeah, I don't know, do you get royalties when books are sold as used books on all these sites? I don't know.
That makes, and I know who is the other one, 2 copies you.
Paul, do you have copies?
And
Just the one. I have one.
The library has one, which I happen to have at home right now, but I also ordered myself one, so which is hopefully coming before Christmas. So I will put that one back, but
And there's a
that's only
little
1 copy.
time if we end up with people having no options, maybe we can make them copy.
Yeah,
Or make one and
or focus on a particular chapter
Yeah.
or 2. Yeah.
my understanding, see if, correct me here if I'm wrong, we'll be with Suhaki for 1 more month,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
And then, so that's the month of January. In February, we deal with the poem of creation.
Yes.
yeah.
And we're gonna take the first 4 chapters. It's not a lot of pages, it's maybe 60 pages. We have a little time, it's 2 months from now that we'll be discussing it.
That's the Pulse.
Pulse, yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's,
Oh,
there's some stuff about poet in there too.
Oh.
I'm sort of transfixed with this notion of pulse. Creation has a pulse, and I'm trying to describe the pulse. I'm talking about interruption. Have you noticed interruptions? I'm trying to talk about calling. I'm trying to talk about empowering. How do we gather the passion that's here? I mean, think of, we got 15 people coming in below 0 weather to talk about a mathematician. What sense does that make? Makes a lot of sense. There's passion, there's enough energy. Love is more powerful than fear.
I want to just say, I tried to send you the video I talked about. The link that is there is not the right link. So I copied it right from, but it didn't work.
Would it be on a Minneapolis?
So I'm sure I can figure out how to send it. I just have to try a different method and I'll do that at home.
Okay. Well, thank you. I assume Bridge is coming, so we should tear down the tables and you do not have to put the chairs away. We'll just line them up as if it were an audience forum, and then they can move them as they want. So if they're not here, that is started to set up for tomorrow. So, thank you for coming. Thank you,
Carol,
For organizing.
good conversation and
and thank you, Chris, or He'd say, we have Kristen in the office, and we have Kirsten here. No, never get anything.
Right.
Thank you, Kirsten, you always have so much to help us. Our needed.
Well, with Suhaki, I mean, I'm the one who studied with her.
Great,
so-
great, you know how she talks.
Oh.
Okay.
You know, I had a request for it.
Marilyn, I know.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Still working to get back to you on that, but I think we've really.
We given it here last time.
I was on
This is for your.
I
What is,
I guess I